begin, okay, I'll start over. Sorry about that. I'd like to call to order the Whatcom County Incarceration Prevention and Reduction Task Force Steering Committee meeting for June 3rd, 2021. It's 11:02 a.m. and we are meeting virtually. Before we begin, we will read the land acknowledgement statement. Before we begin, we acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the Lummi, Nooksack, Samish, and Semiahmoo people who have cared for and tended this land since time immemorial. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We pay respect to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that brings us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all public events. Okay, so with that, we will move into our agenda. First item up is the annual report. So, Jill, how do you want to go through this today? Do we just want to ask if there's any changes or?
Yeah, I don't have anything to report. If you have any changes or suggestions, just let me know. We can talk about those. Otherwise, I have nothing to.
Okay. Has everybody reviewed what was in the packet? Is everybody good with the annual report as presented in the packet then? I see a lot of thumbs, nods.
Barry, this is Mike. I just have a few brief corrections, but I can also just send those to Jill, but they're really small.
Sure.
Yeah, you want to send those to me. Also, Jackie, bless her heart, read through the whole thing and proofed it for punctuation, grammatical errors, that kind of thing. So if that's, so I've got that as well. So yes, Mike, go ahead and just send me whatever you've got and I'll incorporate that into the change.
Okay.
So Barry, I would assume we're approving it, but subject to copy edit for clarity.
Yes, yes. And we're just approving it, of course, just to present to the full task force it's a recommendation, so.
Barry, if it's okay, in training Jackie, when we take this vote today at steering, can we do a roll call vote, please?
We can. So would somebody like to move recommendation with Mike's pending edits?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion on that motion? Okay, we will do a roll call vote. Please call the roll.
Barry Buchanan?
Yes.
Ann Deacon?
Yes.
Arlene Feld? Is it a yes, Arlene? Okay. Stephen Gockley?
We didn't hear you, Stephen, but I saw your mouth move.
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
Dan Hamill?
Aye.
Jack Hovener?
Yes.
Raylene King?
Yes.
Mike Parker?
Yes.
Tyler Schroeder?
Here.
Yes? Is it a yes, Tyler?
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
No worries.
Caleb Erickson?
Yes.
Thank you.
That passes unanimously. All right. We did skip over one. Items for our next task force agenda. We just approved recommending the annual report. What about the index focused meeting for our next task force meeting? Do we want to discuss what Caleb, maybe you could weigh in and kind of give us an indication of how you see that.
Yeah, so unfortunately I missed the last steering committee meeting and the first part of the last full task force meeting because I was having some technical issues. I would like to definitely have an index focus meeting at the task force level that really talks about next steps, where we should be heading trajectory wise, and really honing in on, are we answering the questions that Index is meant to be answering? Are we even looking at the questions that Index is meant to be having? Is there a way to incorporate the GARE concept into Index? Is that ready and ready to roll out, or are there next steps? I believe we talked at length here and at the task force level about having a consultant to kind of guide the discussion and the direction for where Index could go. But we're at this point where Index is kind of done what I think that we're capable of doing at this stage, and we need further development and or guidance from the task force in order to move forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Anne?
I think we've got a lot of moving parts relative to data and information right now, and I feel a little unsure about where to go. So things have changed because of the pandemic. Your practices have changed in terms of who you incarcerate for how long, even arrests. And I guess I wonder how, even if you have a sense of this, Caleb, do you think some of the changes that have been made as a result of the pandemic that have reduced the jail population would continue past the pandemic? And then the second part of my question is, well, then who's in our jail now? And from what I hear from Wendy, you've got the cream of the crop in terms of people with the most challenging set of multiple issues. And I think that also changes our landscape. So just wanted to kind of speak to the obvious, but then wonder, where does that take us?
Yeah, and then in terms of influence, we've got evolving laws at the state level that will influence how law enforcement is, both interacting with the public and how people sort of get involved in criminal justice from the beginning. We have no idea what the actual impact is going to be. I mean, we can guess, but as things evolve at the legislative level, we don't really know what those impacts might be. We have new case management systems coming online, and at least two of the major criminal justice sort of stakeholders in our community alone that will certainly have an impact on what data is available. And then looking forward to the next 2 or 3 years, we will have more data available in the courts and the limited jurisdiction as they get away from sort of their multi and varied records management systems to a centralized system under Tyler technology. So there's a few things that we can kind of look forward to in the future. And again, all of this makes me wonder, is it time to sort of get under the hood of Index and say, hey, are we sure we're headed in the direction that we want to be headed in, or is it maybe adjusting course is appropriate, or is there a bigger picture aim that we're missing because we started out, in a landscape that existed 2 years ago, and things have changed, significantly.
Okay, I'm going to go to Dan.
Yeah, Caleb's right. The landscape is totally different. We've got 5476 coming out of, that's a bill coming out of Olympia that on July 25th will completely change how law enforcement responds or doesn't respond, pardon me, to mental health illness crisis calls. We've got our unarmed 911 response program coming online. We have the Blake decision regarding narcotics and drugs. There's a whole shifting landscape. So what I'm hoping in this discussion with Index is that we can try to get ahead of those items and try to anticipate what that's going to look like for not just incarceration, but involvement with criminal justice systems and what that looks like for individuals. And that's all on top of all the prevention stuff that we've got going. LEAD just came online in a very full way, just several months ago. And Grace has been around for a few years now. So I want to really, those are the things that I really want us to be ahead of the curve on. So Caleb, you're right. Let's try to do it right.
Stephen?
I think Jack and Raylene were ahead of me. If
I'm just going by the order and on my screen, it's just easier.
All right. Then I'll just take a moment and say, I think for this to be a valuable participatory discussion, it would benefit from starting out with sort of recapping, either in materials or in narrative description, what the charge of the index committee was, what the questions that were fed into them were, why we formed sort of an IT nerdish membership of it, whether we've answered the questions, whether our systems have improved, whether they're interoperable. I think we need to understand the landscape of this discussion and addressing the changes everybody's referred to. I think we need to understand the baseline of what we've gotten to. It would even be nice if we had a data analysis of what the composition of the jail population was now, just so we have that background.
Yeah, go ahead, Caleb.
I don't want to skip ahead either, but these things sort of pop in my mind as we go here. One of the things that needs to be said is we don't have a complete picture of what's going on in the criminal justice system as a whole. There's been a lot of focus early days in Index of what's going on with the jail records management system, which is a great place to have a starting point, but there's certainly a lot of information that could or should be available to this committee and to the task force as a whole in terms of how effective are our methods that we are using to prevent people from coming into jail. We simply do not have good data. Certainly Bellingham has kept records of how often they've able to divert people through friendship diversion services and things like that. But there are other courts in the area that may be doing similar things, but we don't have the information, and it is certainly not integrated in a way that is readily available. I'm hopeful that AOC, the Administrative Office of the Courts movement to get everything under one records management system will be useful in the long term. But again, like Dan is saying, it'd be really nice to be able to say, this is what we anticipate happening and trending, and get that information out now so that we can get a hand, because the whole purpose of this is to prevent incarceration, but we really need to understand what all of the components are. And as I can tell you right now, as Index, we do not have all of the information at our fingertips yet.
So who could shepherd this kind of set of tasks that you're describing?
So what I would anticipate or hope for is a repository for information that lives at a higher level than an individual agency level. Something that where we can store and keep information that can gain information from Grace and gain information from the courts and gain information from Sheriff's Office records and different police department records, because we just simply don't know how many times an officer in the field, cites and releases somebody if they don't show up at the jail. That may happen all the time. It may only happen once or twice, but we simply don't know. If we had that information, that is an actual diversion prior to them ever coming into the facility, but we don't have a handle on exactly how often that's happening. And so,
well, you're describing what needs to be done, but my question was, who can we assign the task of moving in that direction? Because how many of us know enough about what you're describing in order to do something like that? There has to be a person.
Yeah,
I think that's a question for the discussion that we would have at the task force. It's not necessarily something we have the capability or time to address now, but I think pointing that out, that lack, is a way to frame the discussion again.
My answer to that, Arlene, would be we are not the only community in the nation that is facing these kinds of issues. Somebody has to be doing this somewhere.
Right.
At some level, and I would want to know who. That's my question as well. Who's doing it? How are they doing it? will it work for us?
Yeah, go ahead, Raylene.
So hopefully this isn't too soon to bring this up. Stephen and I talked about Alexis Harris before. She recently spoke at a virtual program for the Administrative Courts District Municipal Court Administration. Alexis Harris is a professor at the University of Washington in sociology, and she recently wrote a book, Pound of Flesh, Monetary Sanctions as Punishment for the Poor. As she went through data and sharing stuff about racial inequality, I asked the questions about how she was actually gathering the data, because there was indiscrepancies in some of the VERA information that came through, questions about how they were actually able to pull the Latino, Hispanic data out, because the data that she came up with is in the book and which was in the presentation, actually specified the different races and inequality. And she said that it all came through the assistance from AOC. And she also, I'm trying to pull my notes here, said they used a surname analysis through the voting portion, and then were able to take that information, combine it with those that were incarcerated, combine it with the information that was from AOC for people that weren't incarcerated and just had citations, to come up with more accurate data. She gave a lot more information. She had thinking about monetary sanction, race and class disparities, 2 tiers of systems, justice, distinct population. That information, I think, is not only useful for the Index Committee, but for the GARE, for Legal and Justice Committee, for all of us as a whole. And this came out of the Gender Commission, Gender Bias Commission, through the courts. And so I really think she would be beneficial to speaking to her group to assist us in trying to get accurate data for all of our committees, as well as maybe giving us directions on how we can use the GARE tool in all of our committees in different areas. So that's just some food for thought. And if people are thinking that maybe we should look into trying to get her assistance in this, I think we would benefit from it highly. Anne's thought earlier on speaking about, what's the jail population going to be. I believe Elfo actually mentioned not too long ago that even when things start to come back online, that we're still looking at only holding felonies in the jail, and misdemeanors probably won't be going in too often unless they're domestic violence or DUIs, which can lead to felonies fairly quickly. There's not only the law changes that Dan Hamill had brought up, but the Senate Bill 5226 involving Dito Villas Thirds was drastically changed on Tuesday at 4 o'clock when I saw the Thurston County ruling, basically telling the departmental, it's Thurston County versus, well, it's out of their Thurston County, but Pierce, Gladstone, Comac, Spicer were the plaintiff versus the Department of Licensing. And it was an order enjoining defendants from suspension, certain driver's license, and requiring rescission of driver's license suspensions for failure to pay fines, which will be going into effect pretty much immediately because it was an agreed adjournment, which meant yesterday in court, we had several dismissals on driving the license suspended because of failure to pay fines. This was only for civil infraction tickets that were unpaid on moving violations, not criminal charges, but that caused suspensions. So we had at least 3 cases that were dismissed due to that. So I know that Bellingham and District Court were dismissing some of those cases, but now it may be a statewide thing. It also may reinstate a lot of people's driver's license in a very short period of time, depending on technology and the ability of Department of Licensing to follow through with the order that was just put into place. And as Caleb said, AOC changes, we are rapidly learning the new system and what is coming on board, but it won't be on board for all the courts of limited jurisdiction for a full 3 years before we all have the same type of system across the board with the courts. I think that's it that I have. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Raylene. Jack?
My comments are going to seem very pedestrian after all that. I just wanted to say, let's put it on the agenda. I think the discussion we're having is the discussion we're trying to have. And when we discussed this previously, my understanding is we would dedicate a significant portion of the meeting with a short introduction from Stephen or I, Caleb taking maybe 15 or 20 minutes to talk about his challenges, successes, what's working, where some of the gaps are, and then open it up to a facilitated discussion from of course the phone rings now, from the whole task force, and hope that everybody can hear the kind of dialogue we have going on now. So I hope we can simply agree to put it on the agenda on that basis. Thanks.
Anything else on the index portion of our next meeting? Anything else about items for the next meeting? Any additional things that folks want to see?
I just want to jump in and let you know that the only committee meetings between the last full task force and the next full task force is this one. So it might not necessarily be a lot of time spent on committee reports, since there really haven't been any new committee meetings since the last full task force.
Okay, thanks, Jill. Okay, if we don't have anything else for our June meeting, let's go ahead and move into the strategic plan. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, Stephen brought this up, and I think Raylene just alluded to it a bit, but you know, we have in next steps in the annual report that Jill has put before us today that we just approved. There's a piece on there about eliminating cash bail, some reference to some wins in Illinois, and obviously then California just had a very similar alteration with their cash bail. I'm just wanted to bring up to this group, our LFOs in some, could that be considered? I mean, financial obligations in general, I guess I think of them more broadly. The research that I did said that they're very separate, but they impact. I look at it from an impact perspective. And as you know, I try the best I can to bring that voice to this group. So I just wanted to bring up one, if we're looking at a next step of eliminating cash bail, could we also then include, and does it make sense to include limited financial obligations? And if so, should that be something that's brought up at the task force so that there's a little bit more buy-in?
Okay, Jack?
Still, yeah, I'm still forgetting on me sometimes. I wrote the portion about the bail, and it indicated that was probably the single priority that I thought perhaps I could help with left over from Vera that has value. So I think talking about how the LFO could affect that is wise, but I really think the next step, and if it hadn't been for kids with brain tumors and busy lives, I would have written that white paper, but I got a good paragraph into the annual report about the bail because I'm trying to get it on people's minds. And interestingly, as I've procrastinated, there's more and more evidence and best practices emerging around the country to indicate why this could be a practical and wise decision. So maybe we could talk about the LFOs, Mike, prior. And I think, to me, bringing them up together is fine. I would hate to tie them together to where you get both or none, if that makes sense. So I think tying them together, the asking for both probably makes lots of sense, but obviously this will be a policy decision way above certainly my pay grade in the task forces. But I think it's a really valuable issue to consider that absolutely disproportionately impacts those who don't have financial resources in ways that are horrific. So I can't think of much we could do that would mitigate the economic impact on some people disproportionately. So I'll follow up, and maybe Mike, I'll flip you what I'm going to give the steering committee and task force, and we can put a paragraph or more about LFOs in there. Would that work?
That'd be outstanding, Jack.
Okay, thanks.
Raylene?
I'm not against talking about either one of them. I think they both have merit for discussion, but I do think they're two separate issues. One's more post-conviction, one's pre-conviction. And I just think those two topics should be separated.
Raylene, would you be okay though when introducing the topic for discussion to the task force at that point, talking about here's some things we're looking at? Because I think you may be right, ultimately they have to be separate, but as we highlight what some of the priorities are, I think there might be some synergy. They're kind of connected in some ways. Would that, or would you object to that?
No, I think we can say that we want to discuss them because obviously it does impact everybody as a whole. I just think that they're two separate areas and two separate items. So as long as we say these are things we're looking at, but they are separate agenda items.
Agreed. Well, you don't just think that, they are separate. They certainly are. So, but they fall under that, the financial impact. And also Vera didn't call out the LFOs, not that Vera is the end all be all, but we have more evidence and more recommendations relating to that bail thing. So I'll work with Mike, but I think this isn't a formal recommendation so much as a starting point to have these discussions. And sounds good. Thanks.
Stephen, you had your hand up a second ago. Did you want to?
I did, but I'm on vacation. My senior moments are deeper and more frequent. So I lost track. I'll come back to it.
Okay, will do, buddy. All right, let's talk about the strategic plan then. Any comments? Oh, go ahead, Jill.
I just wanted to let you know that I have the task force sequential intercept available to screen share if you'd like me to.
Okay, you want to put that up? Does everybody want to see it? Yeah. So does anybody have any concerns or additions or anything you want to discuss on this?
Yeah, I want to say thank you to Ann and others that it's been there a while now, but thank you for putting the peer-to-peer and the 12-step programs in Intercept 5. I appreciate that.
Anything
Very
else?
quick question is this the Intercept model that's in our packet today?
Yes.
Okay. I just have some minor, most of the corrections, by the way, or suggestions that I had to Jill in the annual report are really in the Intercept model. So if it's salient, we could talk about that really quick. I'm also fine to just email them to Jill. They're pretty small.
Yeah, the last time this Intercept was updated was, I think, in late 2018. So it's dated. And I recall a couple of steering committees ago, Anne was saying that it needs to be revisited and reviewed. So that's why it's on the agenda today.
So, Raylene, did you see your hand go up?
Yeah, I agree that it needs to be reviewed and revisited. I think, some of these programs that we have in place are somewhat on hold. I mean, just looking at the pretrial risk assessment, some of the funding was short on it. And with COVID, some of the services that we would be doing aren't being done. And so I think we need to kind of look at what impacts what's actually happening now and what we're going to be able to bring back into place.
Stephen?
. Sorry, I just got my lost thought back. So if I could revert momentarily to the agenda for the task force meeting.
Sure, go ahead.
It seems to me that would be a point to hear some part of what we're going to hear from Tyler about American Rescue Plan or Recovery Plan Act funding, and start to think about needs that the task force as a whole could identify for working with county administration and the council on allocating some of those monies.
Okay. Ann?
I was just wondering if we needed to include an updated sequential intercept model with our report, because I see it as at the end of our annual report, but it isn't updated. So either we update it before it goes out to the public, or we should maybe remove it for now. Don't
Thoughts
know.
On that?
I don't believe I included it in the 2021 annual report. I can.
I don't know if we'll have time to update it between now and then. What's your deadline? The reason I'm asking is because one of the other discussions on our agenda is about communication and making sure the community knows all the things we've done. And this is the picture is worth 1,000 words document, right? It shows all the things that are in place to reduce incarceration.
So to include an updated plan in the annual report, then I would need to have those changes in my email by early Wednesday, June 9th, which is a little less than a week from today. If that's something you guys want to include in the annual report, we probably need to revote on.
I don't think it should be included in the annual report without updates. And I don't think we're going to have time to do updates with all the committees and nobody else meeting before that date.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, Raylene. Other thoughts on that?
Just agree 100%. I think it's as important and it's worth updating, and volunteer to be a set of eyes, or and if you convene a group, I'm happy to help if that's helpful.
Jill, is this document posted on the county website under the task force?
I believe it is, but let me just check to make sure.
Because I would feel better if even it doesn't need to be part of the annual report, but if it was available to the public, I think it's really important to show all that is happening in our community.
It is on the main task force website, yes.
I'm a happy camper then.
Okay, anything else on the strategic plan?
If you could give me some direction on how you want to move forward with reviewing it, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, let's, speaking of communications, let's talk about communication strategy. Jill, are you the way I'm reading this is you are wanting some input on what a RFQ or RFP might look like?
Well, I do have a quick screen share for this as well. Let me pull it up. The last time this was discussed in steering committee, the steering committee tasked Ann and I with putting together some qualifications specific to the task force for the roster that Ann is developing with county finance for communications strategists. This, what you're seeing, is from Ann and what she included for her health department needs for that roster. If you want to take a look at that. Unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to develop anything specific to the task force. And I don't know, Ann, maybe you could talk a little bit about how that process is working with finance committee, and is only health department can draw from that, or can other departments draw from that? How does that work?
So this is a roster for the entire county, and it is part of the professional services roster. So once a year, this is part of a open RFQ, request for qualifications, basically, and that it is open the entire year. Anyone can apply and submit their qualifications under any of the categories. This category would be communications specialist or consultant. And then at any point in time, anyone in the county can hire anybody on that roster once they've qualified and are placed on that roster. The only caveat is that once a year, professionals have to resubmit their qualifications. So we could use this here if we wanted and just add a few extra words here and there. Like, for instance, in the very first run-on sentence that I wrote, I said, on human services programs and issues impacting homelessness, behavioral health, and other pertinent concerns. You know, we could even add that in if we liked. We could talk about, you know, preventing and reducing incarceration, make it even a longer run-on sentence. So, because the rest is really talking about the technical skills needed, not the subject matter, right? That they have to be experienced in filtering, advanced research, best practices, you know, all that kind of stuff.
So, Anne, what kind of a process would you see the task force engaging in this? How would we do that?
Well, I think if we had a specific goal, which might be ongoing communication to the public, some kind of a ongoing process for informing the community about the different activities underway and their outcomes and their successes. I think we could, you know, talk to people in the community or throughout the state that we know do this kind of work and say, hey, this is what we're looking to do. Do you mind applying to the roster? Which, you know, they can access it from the website. It's fairly simple. And then I think, you know, we would hire them with a specific goal to accomplish what we set out. In my mind, at least in this realm, I set this up because we needed to, we meaning us in the city are coordinating on this and paying for it. We're sharing the cost to hire somebody to talk, to set up ongoing web page and information to the community about the efforts that the local governments are engaged in relative to reducing and eliminating homelessness. So there was a lot of misinformation last year about homelessness and what we were doing and what we weren't doing. And we thought, let's get a specialist in communications who can help us not only communicate, but actually set up a template almost of the different formats we might use and maybe a process for regularly updating information to the public and getting it out there. And so I would see something probably similar to the task force, is that we have ongoing activities. We add them as we develop them. And this has always been an issue for the community. What are we doing to reduce incarceration? And I think if we had a standing process that a communications consultant could put in place for us, we would add on to it as necessary, and the community over time would be well oriented to the formats, whatever they are, web pages, I don't know, blogs, whatever it turns out to be, and that they would gather information as it becomes available. Did I make sense? I talked a lot.
That did make sense. Mike?
And thank you for doing that work. That's outstanding. I was going to suggest, by the way, adding to your run-on sentence. So your idea, I think, is perfect. Adding a few bits in there about criminal justice. And I think most of what is written there is really pertinent, which is outstanding. Another thing that I thought of regarding what their duties could be, Anne, and I don't think this is contrary to what you wrote, but I didn't see it specifically there. You know, the task force has talked about how do we get more feedback, community input into the work of the committee. We've talked about this from multiple lenses, from the racial equity lens, from consumers or people who've experienced the criminal justice system personally or their family members. Might this be an opportunity for a communications consultant to help put that word out there that we are seeking input? And if so, we might maybe add just a piece to that it could include outreach communications or invitations or solicitations for input.
We could, or we could just put it in the contract when we identify someone we want to work with, and because the contract is going to be much more detailed and specific about what we're asking them relative to the subject matter.
Perfect.
Anything else on communications?
Yeah, can I just suggest if anyone has suggestions for Ann on changing this narrative, just email me or email Ann or both of us, and so we can have that for the record. The other thing, one of the strategies that was brought up in a committee, and I don't remember who brought it up, was developing a roster of agencies in the community who would be interested in receiving information on the work of the task force. And so us reaching out to them rather than waiting for them to seek us out. So one of my ideas was to take an agenda item to each of the committees and just have the committee members brainstorm right there a list of agencies and contacts so I could develop such a list. Is that something that you all would find useful? And is that something that I can schedule on committees?
Please do that. That's essential.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, Jill.
Okay.
Stephen?
2 questions. One is, I like Jill's idea. I would expand it from just agencies to informal community organizations as well, whether it's BLM or Riveters Collective or other active groups in the community who are paying attention to our work or our issues. Try to inform as many people as we can. I want to go back, though. The reason I raised my hand was this is a very general statement, and I think it's a good one for a general statement, but it sounds as if the real nitty-gritty is in the contract, from what Ann said. So I wonder if we have a draft contract or if we should be working on having that somewhat templated out, as well as part of our thinking about what our strategy would be. So we'd be ready to jump at a moment's notice rather than having to go back and look at that together as a separate step.
Ann?
I think rather than drafting a contract, what would be more helpful, I think, is drafting our expected outcomes. Because sometimes when we're negotiating contracts, we also are asking them in the process, what do you think is going to work? And then that's what we put in the contracts. But I think expected outcomes would be really helpful that we could give out. Because, for instance, we're developing a roster now. We know a few people have already applied to this. And maybe we identify someone who we think would be a good match. We could send them that expected outcomes and say, what do you think? Is this something you'd be interested in? How might you go about it? We'd pick up the phone and have that talk. But it's usually a collaborative process when we're creating the contracts. And I guess I wouldn't want to second guess someone.
Jill?
I roughed up some ideas for just what Ann is talking about, a scope of work with outcomes and some other information. I can send that around for y'all to take a look at, and we can discuss it at the next steering committee if you like.
That's great, Jill. Perfect. Any further comments on our communication strategy?
What would we do without Jill? That's what I want to know.
No.
That's right.
You would train Jackie is what you would do.
We'll train Jackie, yeah.
I just want to do just really quick. This is normally Arlene's role, but to celebrate that work, this is a big lift. And this has been a big need for this task force. It's been a big need in the world of homelessness for a long time. So to everybody at the county that put energy behind that to develop this and to move this forward, just a brief moment of thanks and appreciation. And I really think it's going to be instrumental, just not incidental. It's instrumental to the work that we do. So thanks.
Yep, I agree, Mike. All right, we'll move on to Deputy Executive Schroeder, and he's going to tell us all about the American Rescue Plan Act.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning, Tyler.
Earlier I said here, and I really meant yes. So I was only kind of paying attention because I heard my name. I apologize for that. So I sent a memo out to Jill, and hopefully the committee members got it this morning, the steering committee members. What that is a memo that the county administration put together, kind of outlining our thoughts and process on the American Rescue Act dollars. I know the city of Bellingham has a real similar one that Tara Sundin and Brian Heinrich and others put together. And I think what may be best is to talk a little bit about timing and process. So up front, there are some county operations that are specifically allowed to, we can use American Rescue Act dollars for. So we're kind of moving forward with that from the county to the county council, asking for some budget supplementals to accomplish that. Those would be kind of the fairly straightforward revenue loss that counties can do associated from 20 to 2021. That would be kind of the continued public health effort that we have on COVID. So identifying the isolation quarantine facilities, the community vaccination efforts, the contact tracing efforts that we are funding in the public health department, and using American Rescue Acts for those purposes. As well as we have a number of frozen positions in the county that we will be moving forward and unfreezing in the next month or so, so we can kind of come back to work. I put that like this because everybody's been working, but we're going to be opening our doors here fairly soon, as kind of the state has recognized that. So we need to bring that workforce back up to where it's going. The county's been talking about hiring some additional support to administer the American Rescue Act dollars. You guys probably don't think it, but administering $44 million is a lot of time and effort, especially when we already administer everything on the backside. So we're looking at bringing forward some additional support to accomplish that, as well as some support to enhance our grant writing and administration. American Rescue for the local government is only a portion, of course, of the larger American Rescue Act. And there are a number of grants out there through American Rescue that you would have to apply for childcare or for broadband or for public health services and a number of different. So we want to bolster our staffing to be able to have a better sense of those and be able to help the community write some of those grants in the real near future. And then we've seen a impact to our criminal justice backlog, our court cases and the backlogs associated with it. And it's really becoming quite of an issue in Superior and District Court and in the public defenders and prosecuting attorney's office. So we're going to look at try some ways to help support in the next year or so to help move those through. So that's kind of the first effort. And we're anticipating that focused effort will be moved forward in June and July, and that will kind of be our first tiered approach. And then our second tier is probably where the task force is more helpful and more interested in providing some input. And what that will be is between now and probably the end of the year, through the budget process, which happens sometimes in November, October, November, we're going to establish kind of those longer term programs. What with American Rescue would we really want to prioritize and focus into the community for 2022, 23, and 24, because that's one of the big differences with American Rescue from CARES Act is it's a 3-year time frame. You actually can spend it up to 2026 if you have the money's obligated by the end of 24. So there's a longer term that we really want to be thoughtful and we want to get good input from the community. And so we wanted to take the rest of this year to kind of understand those priorities and where they go. The memo that we laid out kind of recognizes some buckets to those, but it's not it's not, it's these plus any others that we find out. So I just want to be clear about that. But there's some focus on childcare, you know, families with children, and focusing on the family and child task force. It will be important. Affordable housing is of course a topic that American Rescue allows us to support and move forward. Behavioral health needs is identified as a public health. So, you know, I'm sure as we talk, and this group talks a lot about behavioral health services as it relates, that can go from crisis intervention, that can be some overdose prevention, service and outreach to promote that, those cares. So I think the behavioral health subcommittee would want to take a look a little bit more on that and really see how we could maybe provide some newer or some expanded crisis intervention associated with these American Rescue, provide a good platform in the next couple of years associated with that. We've talked about broadband, really expanding the broadband access is kind of outside of this, but super important as we've seen in the last year. And then some general economic relief and where it goes. You know, as I was thinking about getting ready to talk a little bit with you all, I wanted to focus the discussion probably on that behavioral health and the services associated with it, and maybe having the Behavioral Health Committee dive down a little bit into the American Rescue Act guidance and see where it may fit some of the programs that you guys are looking at moving forward. The other one would be public health data systems. Public health data systems are established. We just got done talking about it, right? And somehow focusing the public health aspect as Caleb was kind of talking about, it's not just criminal justice, as we know. There's this public health component at the higher level, and how does that all approach? And we would probably get a criminal justice aspect to it, but that's great because it's all part of this public health system. So that might be something that we really look into is in the general public health programs, improvement to data and technology is there. I want to put a little caveat because we can't quite yet determine how broad that is compared to just a COVID-19 impact. So that's kind of the language that we have to get more comfortable with, but it's absolutely worth taking a look at and seeing where we can go. And then there's some larger, kind of those larger society discussions on childcare and housing and community health. But right now, those are allowed in qualified census tracts. To use American Rescue Act dollars, you can really focus in qualified census tracts. Whatcom County, City of Bellingham, we have 4 of them. And it's all in the downtown Bellingham core. Kind of the State Street location, the Samish Way, and up James Street. So what the language in the act says is that it's presumed to be allowed for those types of services in those areas or affecting families that live in those areas. And so that's a good guidance, and that's helpful for us because we know we can start really kind of identifying those areas to help support both capital or programs. But it allows for it to be expanded. And that's the component that we're trying to figure out from guidance. And we all do know that our community has been impacted by COVID. Our childcare and affordable housing has been an issue even before, but it's been exacerbated. And we're trying to get the language in the act and understand our community a little bit more so we can expand those kind of social service programs beyond just that census tract. So again, that's kind of our little bit more detailed framework. I would suggest maybe that the committees or the steering committees kind of ask a member of each subcommittee to maybe get a better sense of how their subcommittee programs could be supported by American Rescue Act dollars. We have some links and I can send them to Jill for the information that we have to date. And then that could be reported back through the full task force that would then filter into the end of the year kind of budget process like we've done in the past for American Rescue Act dollars. Last thing I would say is we're still determining exactly how to have the community dialogue on American Rescue. We're absolutely and very open to hearing from the existing committees that we have. But we also want to provide a little bit more community outreach and input and kind of getting better data on how the community's been impacted. And we haven't determined how we're going to do that yet, but I just wanted to let you guys know that we're thinking through that. That's what I got, Barry.
Thanks, Tyler. That was very informative. Ann?
One of the things that I think many of us are aware of is the workforce shortage, and not just in behavioral health, which is absolutely deplorable right now, but in other areas as well. And I know that these funds can help pay in, I don't know what they call it, but incentive funds basically to help ensure recruitment and retention of essential workers. And I want to bring that up as something I think we should look at and also reach out to some of our community partners. We certainly have, the health department convenes a meeting of all the behavioral health providers or the agencies in town on a regular basis. And we could certainly reach out to them, but I think each committee should think about how that might work as well. Because for instance, we have a vacant reentry position in the jail right now, simply because of workforce issues and payments, so.
Jack?
I just wanted to say I read that memo, Tyler. I thought it was excellent. I particularly appreciated how it drew out the importance of one-time projects, particularly, or not backfilling current projects without having an ongoing fund or revenue stream. So I think the frame in which that was written for people who actually read the whole report is important. So I hope maybe in our subcommittees, we might make those points, because there may be some excellent ideas, but that sort of run afoul of that philosophy. So I think that was sort of rippled through the whole document, that it seemed like the better programs for this particular use were those that were independent of other things, or wouldn't create an ongoing expectation and obligation of funds that might not be forthcoming. So anyway, it was a great memo. Thank you for keeping us abreast. And I just wanted to pass that on. And thanks to the beauty of Facebook, Tyler, happy birthday today. Yeah, and thanks for joining us on your birthday.
Thank you, of course, of course. No, you do bring up a good point, Jack. It's one-time money. You know, it's a substantial amount of it, but it's one-time money, so we have to be real cognitive to that. And that's where we're going to focus on kind of larger infrastructure or kind of foundational projects that we will see a long-term benefit from. So, and trying to use that as a framework would be super helpful, like a public health criminal justice data system, right? Something to that effect, that we get that in place and really can invest in that using these funds to move forward. So.
Well, and one of the things Ann always did really well with BRAC and other things is when we would look at some of those, she go, well, that's great, but how are you going to keep funding it? Because it's not just 200,000 now, you're saying 200,000 every time. And so I think perhaps because I was appropriately educated on that a number of times, I got that message. And it really does make sense, because if you set something up that people are used to and then pull it out, it often negates the benefit it originally was designed to serve. So thanks.
Mike?
Tyler, thanks for that. That's great. I also just wanted to, because you specifically mentioned the Behavioral Health Committee, so we will definitely take this on to our next agenda item. Jill was just reaching out to Dan and I this morning on our agenda topics. We have been talking about priorities, and we've actually, with the help of Jill, thank you, Jill, have created a survey that we're going to all of our Behavioral Health Task Force members, subcommittee members, to really get a sense of prioritization and be able to kind of say, what is our behavioral subcommittee members, what do we think we want to put forward? I think that process will actually be instrumental in kind of answering, Tyler, some of the things that you brought up. Second, I was going to bring up the point that Ann Deacon brought, that one of the things that the behavioral subcommittee is wrestling with is having giving a recommendation regarding the behavioral health staffing shortage that we see in so many areas, whether that be direct behavioral health, housing supports, jail reentry from jail. It's really cuts across most of the work of this task force, and it is a big subject for us. And your idea of maybe a signing bonus or an incentive bonus seems to fit both the framework for timing of funds, that maybe they're one time. Maybe we can't increase the salary of every single position, but can we do some hiring or retention bonus or do increased outreach? I just think these are really salient points. And then I'm going to be the voice in the wilderness. My last point is that sometimes dollars that we get that are one-time seed programs, and there may be unique opportunities to, as Tyler mentioned, if it's really valuable, if there's high payoff, if there's low risk that we wouldn't be able to fund, that we not shy completely away from an opportunity that this might start, but that we might have to do the hard work of continuing. I really appreciate Jack's appreciation of the framework, and I get that, and I need that lesson. On the other hand, I've seen great things that get started when we haven't been able to figure everything out. And I just would not want to chase out all potential good ideas simply because we haven't been able to fathom out an ongoing source. Sometimes that's the good work that happens in the 2 to 3 years of funding that we get something that valuable. But Tyler, thank you again for the presentation, and just to let you know, Behavioral Health Committee will certainly be looking at that and want to figure out a good way to pass along the priorities of that particular group. So we'll be working with yourself and with Jill and Ann and others to do that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. I thought a little bit about that, Mike, too, as it kind of compares to the one time, because it is 3 or 4 years that we can use. So you could really build up a program that is important to the community, like additional crisis intervention or wherever we're deciding to go. It's just that the decision makers have to know that we're building that capacity and that it needs to continue. But with 3 or 4 years, in most likelihoods, you would have some additional revenue source just because we've seen overall growth over the years. But we just have to be cognitive to that and prioritize that so that we don't just drop it at the end of the day. So I get your point. And the workforce and premium. So there's a lot of discussion about premium pay. And the discussion in the American Rescue talks about lower income or lower paid positions in the community can get premium pay. There's a little bit of discussion about workforce development. And that workforce development would have to be must demonstrate that it's used to directly address the negative economic impact of the COVID-19 public health emergency. So, and then you could use it for workforce development in some sorts. So I just wanted to call those two details out for when we kind of look and focus on workforce development or premium, that there will be some nuancing to that discussion that we'll really have to do and make sure it fits. But I think it's a good opportunity.
Stephen?
Thanks, Barry. Tyler, I wanted to echo Jack's appreciation for the quality of your memo, the way you set out what we know and what we don't know, and the parameters we have to work with. I thought that was an excellent framework for us. I'm struck by having heard Caleb suggest that we may really need sort of a repository, a cross systems repository of data. And your suggestion that one possibility might be data and technology infrastructure, maybe writ larger than criminal justice reform alone, but I think that would serve our purposes. So I hope we don't lose track of that connection as we think down the road on these planning questions. I also want to say I agree with the detailed work being developed in the committees. but I will note that a lot of the committee membership is outside the task force, or it involves proxies of task force members. And whatever the committees come up with is going to be reported in for evaluation by the task force. So I'm going to go back to saying, I really would like the task force as a whole to have some of this background information, what we know now at least, and how this might play out leading into the budget development process you highlighted. And I don't know that we need you back for this kind of presentation for the task force. I think that would be great, but at least we ought to be distributing your memo to the task force, maybe as part of the steering committee report or something like that. But I'd like to start educating the task force members as a whole to where we are now in our knowledge of the American Rescue Plan Act process and funding opportunities.
Stephen, I think that's a great idea. And I think since, as Joe reported, that there's not going to be a lot of subcommittee reports at our next meeting, that maybe we should have Tyler give us a summary of this and talk to the task force. What's everybody think? No, you don't get to vote, Tyler.
I know I do. Don't worry, Barry. I knew I wasn't voting.
Unless you vote yes, then you can vote.
Happy birthday, and come talk, Tyler.
Yeah, I feel like I'm starting the traveling roadshow, and it's just the beginning. So, yeah, but I used to sell suits, so I can sell American Rescue Act dollars really well.
Well, I'd love to hear that story.
While you're well dressed at the Men's Warehouse. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Exactly.
Anything else on ARPA?
When is the next task force meeting?
June 14th. June 14th.
Okay. I'm around.
All right, we'll move to the question. We've touched on it in and out of our discussions today about joining the GARE Government Alliance on Race and Equity. What's our feelings about that? What's the criteria for joining? I guess I'm not sure what it is. Mike?
Yeah, Barry, thanks. I'm jumping in, but hopefully not the only one to share some opinions on this. I took the liberty of attending a GARE membership session, and I was going to see if that might be of value for a couple of our steering committee members. I think it would help us, Barry, evaluate the question that you have before us today. One of the things that was particularly valuable in attending that membership session is getting a sense of how it might assist us in implementing a racial equity toolkit. What benefits could we get? I'll just offer two pieces of information. One, there are two upcoming membership information sessions. They take about an hour. I think they're highly informative, and they do provide an opportunity for question and answer, and they're run actually by their membership director. One is going to be June 10th, 3:30 Eastern time. The other one is June 22nd, 1 o'clock Eastern time. And I can send that information out as well as links to steering. So I'd like to, I suppose that's kind of an offer, maybe an entreaty that the steering committee or representatives from the steering committee do that and could make a recommendation. And then number two, the other piece is just from my research. And again, humbly, I bring this to you, right? This is not my necessarily area of expertise, but I just think it's so important. Barry, one of the things that I find that it really could be helpful with is connecting with other jurisdictions who are tackling the same problem. And as I think about limited cash bail and think about financial obligations created through the criminal justice system, this is really an ideal area. And actually, as a GARE member, and the county could join, right? And the fee is based on our number of employees or members. And it can expand. You can include members beyond just your county government. But one of the subgroups, so they have these cohorts, and members, it can be I guess you can go as deep in the membership or as light as you need to. One of the ways in going deep is joining a cohort. And there's a particular cohort that is folks, we're talking like city council people and finance managers and court administrators from around the country dealing with financial obligations and looking at that through a racial equity lens and then looking to optimize, right, those systems using that. That's just an example of kind of support that GARE membership would offer, is that cohort in which can share trainings, can share information, connect, share policy changes. And that was one of the examples that I brought to the whole task force is why this could be powerful for us, is that we need to work in common with others. We need to not recreate the wheel. And I think they're going to offer us some really excellent options to choose from, as opposed to just creating them all on our own. So I would just like to recommend that I think its cost is reasonable. And what do the steering committee members think about possibly joining one of these membership sessions to take this further?
I'd be very interested in joining. So I'd look forward to seeing that link or information. And
I wonder how this would coincide with the Racial Equity Commission, and if when these are all great things, but then it's who has the time to actually participate and, you know, make it a good return on our investment. And so I was trying to think of who might have time to participate in some of the offerings. And I was wondering, besides just the task force, because I assume the county would be the member, right? And then would we want the Racial Equity Commission to maybe take the lead on this? Or I know that's new on the horizon, but I'm just trying to figure out how to make this work for us.
Any thoughts on that? Stephen?
My impression is that the Racial Equity Commission won't even be formed until the beginning of next year. And then we'll have some organizing and prioritizing to do before they set out on some actual work. That feels too far down the road to me to defer to. I'm assuming from what Mike has told me before that there's enough flexibility in who gets to be involved in what, that we could shift giving them primary role later on if that seemed appropriate, but that there might be some nearer term value to participation in at least the criminal justice reform cohort. And so I'd hate to put our eggs in a basket in 2022 that may or may not decide this is a good place to put their energy, and especially if we can gather some benefit sooner than that.
Raylene?
Sorry, trying to figure out how to unmute myself. I think it's a great idea. I also have the same concerns as Anne, and I just see that from, just the Legal and Justice Committee. There's so many important members that we want to hear from, that we want to get information from, and we're all struggling to go through all of these different meetings. I just see a lot of people being torn in different directions and feeling like Gumby. Yet I feel like it's an important aspect for us to at least look at or have some participation to see how we could benefit. I mean, just from some of the sessions I just listened to, we expect people to come into court and to fill out all these forms. We're not supposed to give them legal advice or tell them what to do as court personnel and court staff, yet some of them can't read or write. So having the time to take somebody that may not have all of that stuff aside to help them is something, a tool like this, and not recreating the wheel if other courts have people coming in, if other agencies have people coming in to help this. So I think it's definitely something that we should be looking at, but I have concern about time constraints and having the right people involved in it.
Other thoughts on GARE? So yeah, Mike, if you could, I definitely, like I said, I'm interested in that, that membership meeting thing you just described. So please send.
Great. And Jill, would it make the most sense to send it directly to you? Okay, I'll do that. I'll compose that at the completion of our meeting, Jill. I'll send that to you today. And I'm happy, Barry, by the way, if you join, let me know if you care to, which one you join. I'll join again. I thought it was useful. And if there are other members, by the way, of steering, Stephen, I thought I saw maybe your head move a little bit, but if there are other members that might join, I think it's only about an hour and a half of our time. And I think it could be particularly valuable. And then maybe we could have a small discussion, as long as we're not quorum busting, about that, and then make a formal recommendation, possibly if through steering or to the county council, whatever the proper methodology of that would be.
So Raylene, is that a new hand or is that the last hand?
Last hand, sorry, gotta learn how to take it down.
Okay, no problem. Anything else on GARE? Okay, is there any other business? We're at the end of the agenda. Stephen?
Well, this is where I loop back to Raylene's idea on inviting a presentation from Alexis Harris on data, racial equity, LFOs to the task force. What I've seen her present is a 20-minute presentation, probably with some Q&A wanted afterwards. So it could be a portion of a task force meeting. It could lay some groundwork for the committees to take up some of the questions that get raised. And I think Raylene and I are interested in proposing that it go on task force agenda sometime soon, maybe July or August. Raylene, you have anything you want to add to that?
I was just amazed by your presentation, and I think it's not just going to be beneficial to one committee, and that's why I think it needs to go through the whole task force. It discusses a lot of things that all of us are dealing with in all the assets, whether it was mental health, legal injustice, criminal cases that they might have, poverty, housing. It just, she really focuses on a lot of different areas that I think we can all find beneficial. So I think it would be very beneficial to the whole committee, as well as the index committee, because she may be able to give us assistance in gathering data in the future.
So it sounds like there's a lot of interest in having this either July or August. How would we, go ahead, Jill. You're probably going to answer my question before I ask it.
Actually, I'm asking you a question. I was just wondering, is there a speaking fee involved, or do we just invite her to attend?
There may be a speaking fee. I have her email address, and I'm more than happy to share that with you. And then we can reach out to her and see what she has to say on that. So
yeah, if we could reach out and find out both if there's a fee and her availability on either July or August meeting, and then we could go from there. Okay. Anything else?
That sounds like a good approach to me, Barry. Thank you.
All right. Any other business? Okay.
Sure, Barry. I'll bring up one thing. I'm probably in a minority, but my experience with August meetings is they're not well attended. Now, I know we made a decision to do it, but now is the time I would suggest, if we're ever going to consider canceling a meeting, August is one that historically, I know I'll be unavailable August 15th, and I know I'm not alone. So I'm throwing it out there. Maybe we could poll the task force if we want to meet in August, unless we have a pressing need. And I'm not Stephen, I know I caught you. I didn't bring this up with you ahead of time. We probably even see it differently. But and Stephen's very capable of running a meeting if I'm not there. So, but I just find August meetings to be, I mean, it's the best month of the year for those of us that live here, and meetings are not where a lot of us want to be. So,
any thoughts on that?
I think the question is what the attendance would be, and so I think the idea of polling the task force pretty soon is a good one.
Yeah, let's do it before we reach out and offer a speaking spot for an August meeting that isn't going to happen. So
yeah, that's what made me think of it. I would put her in September or July, because even if we have an August meeting, it's likely. I mean, Zoom and COVID has changed things to some extent. I think attendance was higher last August than in August of 2019, but things are also changing. I mean, the Northwest Washington Fair is that week. Not that everybody's going to the fair, but my point is there are, as people are vaccinated, more and more activities, and I think traditional patterns may start to reemerge.
Okay, so I guess we should do that. Get on that right away then. Anything else for the good of the order? Okay, do we have anybody that would like to we're in public comment? Is there anyone that would like to speak from the public?
So there's only one attendee right now. So if you would like to speak, just go ahead and virtually raise your hand at this time. I don't think there's any hands raised.
Okay, well, folks, great meeting. I hope, Jill, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, Jackie, for your help today. Barry, if you have a few minutes after the meeting, are you available? And if so, Jackie, at the end of the meeting after Barry adjourns, go ahead and stop the recording, but don't end the meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, I can hang out for not long. I got a 12:30, but I can hang out for eight minutes or so. All right, folks. Good to see you all. Have a great week. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, everyone. Productive meeting. Thank you.
Yeah, we're adjourned.
Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you, everyone.
Hey, Barry, thanks for sticking behind. I have
Jill, can you stop the recording? I'm sorry, my mouse was being very, I can't get it away.